So thanks for joining us, Dan.
You bet.
Dan is the Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Walmart and started his career right here in Austin, working for then Governor George Bush.
I did.
And used to have an office right next door, he told me, so he knows this hotel better than anybody. If you have any questions, he's not going to be here for very long, but he knows where all the bathrooms are and everything. So
bringing some value to the conference.
There you go. Thanks for having us here in your town. So last month, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, which was a traumatic event for the country, but kind of a turning point for Walmart, because coming out of that event, Lee Scott, who was the CEO of Walmart at the time, was really inspired by the way the company came together, brought supplies to people who needed it for, after the hurricane. And at the time, he was searching for a way to Walmart to have a better story to tell, he said. And he said, what can we do to be the Walmart of Hurricane Katrina all the time? And so what he did was sat down with the leadership team and he came up with some ambitious goals for the company, set ambitious goals, three main goals. One, to make all of your energy renewable, 100%, reduce waste in the system, and to have a more sustainable supply chain. Now, at the time, as you just said, you were hiding under your desk in the White House dealing with the other side of Katrina. But so with that context, when you came into the company 2 years ago, joined Walmart, what did you see coming into a company that had been working to build sustainability into its everyday processes, and where had the company gotten to and where is it today?
Yeah, it was really a fascinating story, and one that it was interesting once I got there to learn about. As you said, I was on the government side of it and all the paralysis and political problems that we were having. And then seeing, some of you who may not recall, back then what happened was we obviously had stores that were impacted and associates that were impacted in the region. And we were taking, at that time, Lee Scott would describe a very predictable approach of kind of having the meetings in which we were, how would we get this store fixed, or what are we going to do about this freight or this, truck or this. And finally, as the cumulative effect of what was happening there and what people were seeing all across the country, frankly, of the strife that our fellow citizens faced, he basically in the middle of the meeting said, let's just stop asking questions and let's just start acting. And that's when truck after truck after truck after truck just started to head for New Orleans with materials. And in a fascinating story where a store manager outside of New Orleans the facility itself had been damaged, but there were still goods in there that could be used. And she literally somewhere found a bulldozer and bulldozed the front of the super center so it opened and just told the people of the community to go in there and take what you want. And so what Lee talks about is it was in a moment of darkness for our country, it was a bright shining light for us to say, wow, we can make a difference. We're not just the retailer down the corner. And that was really the mentality that Sam Walton brought to everything, was store by store, keep your head down, you take care of your customer in the store and everything will take care of itself. And when the company grew so large as it did, it realized and recognized that, we have a responsibility to think bigger than just a store-by-store approach. And then when we saw what we could actually accomplish when we put our minds to it, let's do something different. And that's when he turned to his team and said, let's put our best foot forward. Let's stop being on the defensive and being worried about what people think. Let's just do what's right. And those three goals, and they sound pretty of course you would say 100% renewable as a goal, that you would say zero waste. But those are
that could just be out there in the future forever.
Well, that's true, but if you think about it as a management team who have P&L responsibilities and talking to the folks then, there was divisive, really tough conversations about whether a company who really didn't make any public commitments to anything at all on the day before going to making these massive commitments for the company in a way that they had no idea how they were going to solve them. And so now we're 10 years into this, and you said 100% renewable energy. Globally, we are now at 26% on our way to the goals. We put out a goal of 2020 of 7 billion kilowatts of electricity, which would be about the equivalent of taking all of Austin's homes off the grid for a year. We are about just shy of 50% of our way to that goal by 2020. So we're making big progress. We don't know when we're going to hit 100%, but we're holding ourselves accountable to get there.
Well, while we're on the subject of that energy goal, you had some news today that came out that
We did.
You have a big announcement that you're going to buy electricity from a 200 megawatt wind facility located right here in Texas. I think a 10-year deal. Tell us a little bit more about that. How did that come to pass, and like how significant is that in your journey towards this energy goal?
Well, when you have such a big goal of 7 billion kilowatts by 2020, 100%, you've got to take big bites at the apple, and you have to do it in a very diversified way. So we're very aggressive in solar, very aggressive in wind. And what this Pattern Energy's place in Comanche, Texas allows for us to do, we're going to be purchasing over half of their energy supply there, which will basically mean when we have over 350 stores here in Texas alone and distribution centers and Sam's Clubs. And what this will basically be is 18% of our electricity to those stores will be supplied by this one deal that we're cutting. And we got to think about these big contracts and these big long-term, decade-long commitments, not only just in Texas but across the country, if we're going to realize the goals that we've set for ourselves. So we're very excited about it, but it is the type of partnership and pattern of how we're going to. And the way to think about it also is that in the early years of meeting our commitments, there was a lot of much more low-hanging fruit, things we could do with our own trucking fleet, what we could do inside as light bulbs and those things. And we mopped that up pretty fast in the early years. For us to really make step change and kind of continue down this path of getting to 100% renewable, we're going to have these types of partnerships that we're announcing today. So we're really excited about it.
Is that something that took a while to happen, or did that come together fast? Like, how do you?
Over several months, but we've got relationships with many of these companies now that are very aggressive, not only in the wind space but also solar. And we last year did an event with President Obama on solar energy. We're going to double the amount of stores which have solar energy over the next 10 years. We already are the largest user of solar energy in the United States right now. So it's those types of big partnerships that are going to make us able to realize our goals.
I just want to remind everybody we'll have a few minutes for questions later in the session, so get your questions ready and we'll call on you. So I just want to point out one quick uncomfortable fact. Your stock price this year is down about 25%. It's doing worse than the market. You're in the midst of trying to overhaul stores. Doug and the rest of the leadership team decided you needed to improve your store experience for customers, get people buying groceries at Walmart again. You've got all these challenges, and you mentioned the P&L, tension. When you're going through a period where, you're trying to turn things around a little bit, is it harder to keep that focus? How do you keep that focus on the sustainability effort, top to bottom in the organization?
Every publicly traded company goes through these points where they are trying to stay focused on long and medium-term goals, but also the realities of short-term P&L pressure. And we have obviously leadership not only in the Walton family, but on the board of directors that they want us to keep that long-term goal. And it's something that what was really that made it magic inside of Walmart, and this is the advice I give to any company who's embarking upon. I oversee sustainability efforts, and we have a sustainability office, but in and of itself would never be successful in achieving these goals. It is so ingrained in our business and in the leadership ranks of our business. The head of our sustainability office always comes from, we do a rotating tenure of a couple years where we take them out of the business and put them in that role. And as we realize, for example, our 2020 goals of meeting our renewable energy goals, essentially, and some of the other goals that we put forward, it'll be $1 billion of annual savings to our company that we can either plow back into price reductions for our customers, et cetera. But the bottom line is that we have to be able to walk and chew gum. We have to be able to take care of our short-term needs, whether it be making sure that we spend $1.5 billion this year on raising wages for our 1.2 million workers in the United States. That'll go to $10 next year, which is be another significant investment. Other things we're doing, while at the same time we're transforming our company because of what technology is doing, is we're building one of the largest internet companies inside one of the largest retailers. And so doing those things at the same time is tough. But I think it is, since the inception of the sustainability efforts, it has been ingrained in the business, and understanding that there can be what's known as a double and sometimes triple bottom line. It's good for business, it's good for our stakeholders, and it's good for society. And that's the prism in which we make these decisions and invest in them.
when Lee Scott set these goals, the context was we're going to use our scale to do good things, but also it's going to be good for our business, right? But
That's right.
so one thing I wanted to ask you was, and you know, this probably applies to a lot of businesses, you can set goals, you can set these 3 big goals out there, but how do you balance like the big aspirational goals and the more near-term targets? You know, what lessons have you learned, has Walmart learned about how to get where you need to go incrementally, you know, when you're trying to reach those goals out into the future?
Be very careful in setting those targets. I mean, that is the challenge, is that if you're going to have a broad, idealistic, ambitious goal like 100% renewable, you have to have waypoints along the way that you hold yourself accountable, and frankly, that stakeholders hold us accountable to. And what has been interesting about this process, it wasn't just that Walmart decided that it was going to, you know, enter the game of sustainability and those things, but the process that we've followed, in which, based on good advice we received, is that we've invited some of our harshest critics a decade ago into the decision making. And so we have a very long-term relationship with Environmental Defense Fund and other environmental NGOs who help us along the way, in addition to our partners, particularly suppliers. And that's the other thing we've really learned, is that if we just went it alone and said, hey, we're big, we're Walmart, we'll set goals and people will follow, we will find ourselves not meeting those short and medium-term goals. But the way we've engaged, not only, like I said, environmental NGOs, but also our suppliers, everybody's kind of coming to the same reality of saying, okay, this is stretch, but we can achieve it. And you don't want to just set goals. And that was one of the things I think that was originally debated at Walmart. It's like, let's set in a goal we know we're going to meet. Well, that would have probably, based on the narrative that was...
A lot of low hurdles.
Yeah, exactly. So we had to put a stake in the ground that was bold and kind of game-changing, just to stop the conversation and restart a new one. Mm-hmm. And then the process we followed after that was one in which we've engaged, like I said, external and sometimes some of our harshest critics to help us set those goals.
When the executive committee meets, how do you grade your progress? And is that, you know, one of the pillars of your conversation when you convene?
Absolutely. And some of those, like I said, some of those, and what we're talking about, energy efficiencies of our fleet or of trucks or storage, the metrics are very quantifiable, particularly on waste. We've got globally, we've eliminated 85% of the waste that we attempt. You can track that down to, you know, almost the very specific piece of product that you're having to deal with. So we have ingrained metrics throughout this process to hold up, like I said, to hold ourselves accountable and allow others outside to hold us accountable. Mm-hmm. And those things are shared right along with the P&L. It's in the conversations on budgeting and forecasting for the next year and for the coming years, sitting down with the real estate team who have to factor that into building new stores, whether they're going to have solar, those types of things. It is just a part of the business now. It is not treated as an ad hoc line item. It is treated as part of the business.
Even as you're pushing to reach these goals, earlier this year, Doug McMillan at your sustainability milestone meeting said you're looking now to push beyond these goals and to push change into whole systems, to identify flaws in supply chains and fix them and just kind of go deeper. When he was coming into the job as CEO, what were the conversations that you had about how to take this further? If you're 8 or 9 or 10 years into, you know, knocking out of the low-hanging fruit, how do you push it further and keep advancing, you know, progress in the company?
Yeah, one of the good things is that Doug has been there all along the way. He was a part of the leadership team that made the decision 10 years ago to embark upon this path, and he has been a part of and seeing firsthand the type of progress we can make. But he's also seen the limitations, even for a company of our size, knowing that the first order of business had to be get our own house in order. Mm-hmm. And that is where, like I said, those are the early years, and still to this day, we're trying to put our own best foot forward. The second logical next step is then to engage our direct ecosystem, which is mainly our suppliers. And we've done that through building a consortium of over 1,300 suppliers that make up almost about 65% of the products we sell, that we're working together to make them more sustainable through metrics, through transparency, and those things. And so Doug has seen this all along the way, but he's stepping back and seeing the larger trends that all of us are seeing, which is if population as large, particularly if you think about us being the largest grocer in the world and the pressure on commodities around the world, and you look at population growth, you look at the scarcity of product, of commodities, you look at the pressure on the climate and the pressure it's going to put, and you start thinking about the type of systemic change that's going to require not only us and our suppliers, but governments and NGOs around the world, this to us feels like the next logical step for us to say, what do we need to do collectively to really change the arc of this? Because right now, we can meet a lot of these aggressive goals we have and still come up short.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the sustainability index. You have around 1,300 suppliers signed up for that, and it assessed something like 65% of the goods you sold in the U.S. last year. Just maybe take us like a level deeper on how that's worked. Where did it not work? How did you have to adjust it to make it work better? Or, you know, have the suppliers embraced that process?
I think they have, and some issues are easier than others, but you think about, let's say, for example, the announcement we made recently on chemicals, and what we're working with a lot of our suppliers, who there's through both customers and others and NGOs are saying that we should be more transparent about the chemicals and which chemicals that we as a buyer of those goods would believe to be no longer, that we should work to remove from products. And that was a long process using this platform for us to engage with our suppliers and give them enough time to make business decisions. They have the same P&L pressures we have, and if we just throw out edicts and say, do this now and put it in a press release, we're not going to be effective over the long haul. And so taking
you tried that and it didn't work in the past?
Well, it's not as much that we tried the stick approach as much as the unintended consequences. Take, for example, refrigerants. And so a lot of understanding that refrigerants can be a gross emitter. And so a lot of people are saying, how do you go to a natural refrigerants? Problem is the energy needed to power natural refrigerants is actually more than what, so we started focusing on leaking from our current fleet of refrigerators as we rotate them out. And so unintended consequences like, okay, that makes sense there, but when you start getting to the practicalities of how it's going to get operationalized, you run into challenges. So what we have found is that instead of just throwing out hard goals with edicts through press releases, that through engagement like the consortia gives us with our 1,300 suppliers, you can actually accomplish a lot more. And so we're trying to do that on a lot of different fronts.
I want to give people a chance to ask questions if we have any questions in the audience. We have one right over here. Let's wait for the microphone and just remember to identify yourself.
Sure. I'm Kathy Fitzgerald from PSEG. I'm just wondering, with all the renewable energy you're using in wind and solar, how much of that is dependent on the subsidies you get at the federal and state level to make it economical?
Well, so obviously, like any company, we would take advantage at the state or federal level of tax provisions, but we're looking at it much more holistically than that and believe that the economic models we have, that these do pay off. Like I said, just based on, not on the current tax structure, but if you look into 2020, and if we meet our renewable goals, we're looking at $1 billion in savings annually for us. And so I think any way you look at it, even with the tax provisions or not, the math works in our favor over the long haul. And that's the challenge, is that we've got to, if we just looked at that on an annual P&L basis, it would be difficult. But if you look at it over the long term, which we've pledged ourselves to do, it would. Well, I don't have the specific calculation on what the breakdown is on that, but again, I think the math over time would still work in our favor.
We've got another question over here. I think we have a microphone.
Jules Kortner, Rocky Mountain Institute. It's striking that between you and Prologis, that's about 70% of the rooftop solar market in the commercial industrial arena. Why do other companies not follow your lead? You make it sound so obvious.
You know, I think a lot of companies are doing it. Obviously, a company of our size, when we have, you know, over 4,000 rooftops around just the United States and over 10,000 around the world, we're going to move the needle maybe more than other companies. And hopefully what we can do through our, through our scale, that we can make it more economical, where it doesn't just take subsidies from government to pull it off. But I think there is probably hesitancy on a lot of companies wondering if they can make the math work over the long term. And so that's something that we spend a lot of time in. And like I said, for a company of our size and our ability, we're able to make the math work both in the short and the long term. And so that's probably the hesitancy you're seeing from companies, is that, and I think to be frank about it, I think the politics around the issue is one that probably gives companies and boardrooms reservations to really engage, but it's one that we feel very comfortable about.
Questions? We have one right here from John Needham.
John Needham with Fortune. Dan, where do you see the consumer these days, U.S. consumers, interested in sustainability when it comes to buying products and also with respect to food?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because I think if you look at public opinion polls, increasingly you're seeing growing numbers of US, not just U.S. consumers, we're seeing this around the world, but specifically here in the United States, a greater understanding of and demand on understanding the sustainability of not only companies, but obviously of products that are being sold like that we sell in our stores. But it hasn't come to the fruition that I think if you would have asked us 10 years ago that we had thought that there would be as much customer demand day in, day out in the stores. And I've been surprised by that. And then obviously, when you look at us as like I said, one of the largest food distributors in the world, the amount of waste we're still seeing in society and in this country when it comes to food is stunning, to say the least. And so there's a lot of education that still needs to be done at the customer level. That's something that we're taking a hard look at, is what is our role in helping educate the customer, whether it be in the aisle or at the checkout or through our corporate efforts. But I think there's not as much activation. There's acknowledgement and understanding, but there's not as much activation on the customer side that we're seeing, at least when we sit, than I thought we would at this point.
And you've started doing that on the web too.
We have
started identifying products that are sustainable. What kind of response have you gotten?
Pretty good response. We've, like I said, on our Walmart.com site, some of the products we're showing, whether they meet certain thresholds, and we're doing that in concert with, in partnership with our suppliers, because we think there is a growing demand, and so a good place for us to start was on our e-commerce site. We're also doing that, interesting enough, it's kind of in a roundabout way, our U.S. manufacturing initiative, in which Walmart has pledged to reshore or onshore $50 billion over the next 10 years of products here. What that also helps us do is cut some, routes down from overseas, and which cuts emissions as well. So we're trying to, and that's another thing that customers can be engaged in, because if they feel incented to buy a U.S. manufactured product, that has an indirect positive impact on our goals on sustainability as well.
But what are you seeing? Is it driving sales at all to identify products as more sustainable, or is it hard to? It's
in pockets right now. It's early days. We've just launched this in the last few months. Like I said, and it's when you're working off a base of our number of it's hard to say it's really moving the needle yet, but we're starting to get these tools to make it, and that's the key for any retailer right now, and whether you're a bricks and mortar or omni-channel is how we make this information useful. And so when a mom walks into one of our stores, that information is just at her fingertips. We've got to do a better job of giving her that information so she can act on it, and that's something all retailers are working to get better at.
So before we're going to have to wrap up soon, I do want to just ask you one political question, since we have a great political strategist.
That was the last panel.
Yeah, I know. Well, but they didn't talk very much about Trump. I mean, so the current discourse in the Republican debates, do you think that this is just the silly season and we'll get to something more serious, or are you a little worried about where the direction of the party is going right now?
Well, somebody who was in charge of press and communications for George W. Bush, it was always with trepidation when he went up on stage to make a speech or a press conference. You never knew it was going to come out. It surely must be the case when Donald Trump takes stage. I couldn't imagine being the staffer to him. Look, at the end of the day, the structure of primary politics and presidential politics is one in which I think gravity takes hold. And if you just go back 4 years, and let's remind ourselves, at this point, the former governor of Texas, Rick Perry, was winning by double digits for more than 50 days. The second person who ran in the lead for 44 days was Herman Cain. The third person, if you can remember, who led the primary, this is all before we got to Romney, was, anybody know? Newt Gingrich for 44 days. And so you're going to see like I said, iterations of this. Now, obviously, it's a much more crowded field. It winnowed a little bit, probably needs to do a little bit more. Probably won't happen for a few more weeks or months, or might even to the point we get into to voting time. But gravity will take hold.
Well, You don't have to worry about it anymore.
I don't.
You just have to keep driving Walmart's sustainability journey. We're out of
Right.
time. Thanks so much for joining
Appreciate
me,
it.
Dan.
Thank you.